Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Once a DJ. If you'd like to support the show, then head to onceadj.com/support to find out how you can help. If you'd like to get in touch with any feedback or suggestions, email onceadjpodcast@gmail.com. Once a DJ is produced by the good people at Remote Control. If you'd like to find out more about working with them, head to remote-ctrl.co.uk. Time for the show. Once a DJ is brought to you with the support of Vinyl Underground Record Store. Since 1993, VU has been shipping new and used underground house, techno, disco, hip-hop, soul and more worldwide from Northampton in the UK. They're your go-to store for upfront releases, repressed classics and deep digging for undiscovered gems. And they're a great crew to deal with who really care about the music and their customers. To show the support to the Once a DJ community, they're giving you 10% off your next order. Just head to vinylunderground.co.uk and use the code ONCEADJ10 at checkout. You also get free UK delivery on all orders over £100. That's ONCEADJ10 at vinylunderground.co.uk. Welcome back to Once a DJ, everyone. We're joined this week by producer, songwriter, label owner, self-publisher, remixer, novelist, and former DJ, Mark Rae. Mark, how are you doing today?
I'm good, Adam. Thank you very much for having me on.
No problem. You've been sort of on my kind of backlist for quite a while, so it's good to finally get you on. So you've done a lot of different things here, and what I like with this show is when we kind of, like when I started, it's about, okay, like say your first step on the journey is a passion about DJing. It's kind of, how did we get into that? And then what are all the different places it can take you and the journey it can take you on?
Yeah.
So what was your first sort of experience around music and where did you grow up? Is it Newcastle?
So I was born in Ashington, the mining village. Well, it's not a village, it's a town really. And then brought up in Cramlington, Newtown. And then we moved when I was about 12 to a different place called Ponteland. And then I studied in Manchester with a degree. So that's basically my early arc. But I mean, obviously music everyone's exposed to music from a very young age. In my case, it was through 7-inch vinyl and the radio, particularly the radio on the weekend when in the early 70s, my father would be fixing Hillman Hunters and family cars that were rust buckets as they were back then. And of course, it put the Binatone radio on that would be sitting on out in the garden, you know, on hot summer's days, and just those fantastic shows that would be on a weekend. And I looked back to correct and see what this was, but apparently on a Sunday they did 2 or 3 hours of it. Now we go back to 1969, and they'd do the charts, and my dad would go, oh, listen to this one, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, or you know, the Red Baron, and all these songs that were, you know, actually fantastic. Still, I mean, it was the late 60s and the early 70s. Some of the songs that were in the charts are just still stunning now. Songs like Summer in the City by Lovin' Spoonful, which if you listen to that now, it'll send, you know, makes the hairs on my arms stand up, because it's like I'm back. You know, like Marcel Proust's Madeline, I'm back in the back garden with my dad fixing the car. Down, down, da-down, down, da-down, down, da-down, down. Hot down, Summer in the City. Do you know what I mean? And those things, the immense emotional force that a good pop song has coming from a small radio when you're a child, and you're like, wow, what world is inside there? Because it's not just the song, it's like, what's he singing about? Where's that being broadcast from? Because it's not from around here. You know, it's like a little window for a child's mind into the fact the world is big and brassy and interesting.
Yeah, because that's a song that you reference in the book, isn't it, as well?
Yeah, because I remember it. More often than not, the songs that I remember the most when I was very young were the ones that my dad would react to, and he would react in the same way as someone who was on the dance floor who he had you were DJing for. So from a very young age, you know, I'm talking, you know, 4 or 5 years old, I was watching my dad, you know, bang the steering wheel in the car when a certain tune came on, and, you know, have an unmistakable physical reaction to wanting to dance or react to the music. You know, it's very emotive people in my family. So therefore, you can see I'm like, from a very young age, music is powerful, and music creates reactions. So I think that's my origin point. And then from that point onwards, I think for anyone listening who is the same age as me, who went into their teens in the early 80s, you know, it was 1981 when I became a teenager, and that is such an interesting time. I'd been too young to understand punk, but then I think very strong, you know, like elder brothers and sisters of my friends were going through it. And I can remember someone playing Orgasm Addict, the 7-inch single, and it's going, what's that? What's an orgasm? You know, and that fact that punk was weird and dangerous and interesting, and people would spit on you in the street. Do you know what I mean? This is a pretty rough time, that era. But then you've got people like Gary Newman appearing on Top of the Pops, you know, and doing Our Friends Electric, and just literally going, what's this? You know? Because it's like a weird man all done in makeup with it. That turning point of synthesizers defining the beginning of something new. And I think that defined a lot of my early... I can remember bands like Rainbow, the sort of kind of heavy rock stuff being in the charts, and then suddenly like Vienna coming on, you know, and In the Air Tonight by our boy, Phil Collins. And they sounded astonishingly different at the time, you know. And then obviously that led me to buying things like, so as well as like buying the best of the Jam as they sort of ended and taking that all in, I also bought The Golden Age of Wireless by Thomas Dolby, which is one of the most ethereally, beautifully brilliant albums in, you know, the British music canon, because it's a guy who was a genius at using synthesizers and early versions of samplers. And I think it's not a mistake that I was drawn to what he was doing, because it was very scientifically complicated in a way, but lyrically deep. So, you know, I think my childhood coming into that new era of electronic equipment, and then a little bit later samplers, defined my journey in life, you know, by just luck and timing, you know, because I was buying these records that meant a lot to me. Prefab Sprout, Steve McQueen, Thomas Dolby produced that as well. But then suddenly the stuff started happening. I went to school with the daughter of the overseas producer for The Tube. So on a Friday, sometimes she'd come into school, you all sat at your desk, and she'd say, does anybody want to go to The Tube tonight? And, you know, I go, yeah. And she'd give me tickets, and I'd go onto The Tube and see Salt and Pepper perform My Mic Sounds Nice, or Mantronics, or Bobby Womack. So at that time, The Tube in Newcastle was one of the most forward-thinking and excellent pieces of music and journalism around music that there's ever been in this country. So once again, luck. It happened to be in Newcastle from Tyne Tees Television. Do you know what I mean? I thought it was Channel 4, wasn't it? But
I didn't even know it was shot up there.
But, you know, the fact that then I was in school with this girl and I saw Bobby Womack perform live, as well as, you know, that Madness do It Must Be Love as they were breaking up, and like lots of key moments that brought me close to it. I mean, I'm in the background of the crowd when the Smiths do This Charming Man, when he's throwing the gladiolas around. And it's like, there's schoolboy Mark Rae, you know. But at that time, you had a lot of people dressed in ripped denims who were into the Smiths, and like, it was all about, you know, kind of being melancholy. But this rumble of hip hop was going on, and soul music, and remembering my dad's response physically to music and disco and reggae and stuff in the 70s. I was like, what is this? This banging stuff with loud drums and people flowing on top. And, you know, I'd experienced New York as a, as a 10-year-old. I went there on a Greyhound bus. and it was absolutely terrifying because I went to Toronto to see my dad's sister, and he said, "Son, do you want to go to New York?" I was like, "Yeah, that'd be great." So we got on this bus and we sort of travelled through the night, and we got off and we were given leaflets that said, "You mustn't go here. You mustn't go there. Do not go here. Do not go to the Bowery. Do not go to Times Square. Do not go." And it's like, what are we doing? So I was like cowering next to my dad, looking at those huge buildings. And of course, that was 1978. So if you think about it, I was on the ground while the sort of funk and then the beginning of hip hop was happening. And I could feel, I didn't know, but I could feel the city for the time that I was there. So all these little things added up to me having some kind of stuff going into my DNA. Obviously, Americana to the Smiths fans in the mid-'80s, Hang the DJ, and Americana was kind of weak, and anything that was... I remember doing my first and only ever job with this guy from Gateshead, and on a Saturday, you were allowed to bring in your own music on cassette while we were doing these experiments to test the amount of paracetamol in Solpadeine tablets. And I brought in, so I'm crushing these tablets in, and I brought in this cassette, and it's got Chuck Brown and the Soul Searchers playing Go-Go, and bits of Sly and Robbie's dub album, and then bits of this. And I remember him turning to me while the Chuck Brown song was on. I was going, "What is this rubbish? This is ridiculous." And he had like makeup on from being in like the night before performing in like a synth band. And I'm like, "This is the real stuff, man. Listen to Chuck Brown. I feel like busting loose." And he's going, "This is ridiculous stuff. Why are you listening to this?" So, there was that kind of lack of knowledge about true underground black music in the wider public. Do you know what I mean? So it was almost like there was a sense that I was attracted to it naturally, but then once you started getting the odd record from underground record shops, you felt like you were part of some kind of grand secret that you could never learn enough of because there was no internet. Do you know what I mean? There's no...
Yeah, what was the supply of black music into Newcastle like then at that time?
It was good because there was Hitsville, USA, and then there was also a lot of good clubs. Newcastle's a great place, and it always had a connection to all the good scenes because the people are passionate there, So there was Tom Corker and a guy called Scotty had a night on, I think it was a Thursday night at Rock Shots, which was a gay club. And you could go in there and Jimmy Somerville would be at the bar, and it would be, but that's the whole point of my story is that at that time, the places where you'd hear LL Cool J, Ambad, Chuck Brown and the Soul Searchers, Rock Lobster, all these kind of tunes would be in gay clubs doing student nights on the weekdays. Whereas like if you were to go to, there was a great soul club in Newcastle called Walkers, which was playing all of the, the proper soul tunes, the big Jam and Lewis productions, the Shirelles, the Alexandra O'Neills for the people with chinos and swept back hair. But then the students and the underground crew were in these back rooms or in these gay clubs where people were playing, obscure import hip hop mixed with house, mixed with go-go. It's a really special time, isn't it? Because at that point, shops like Hitsville, USA, clubs like the Riverside, Rock Shots, World Headquarters, to be a student then, your mates would perhaps be into the Smiths and the Water Boys and this type of stuff. And then you'd be like, "No, look at this Public Enemy album." And it would be like, I remember hanging around the DJ booth at the Riverside in Newcastle, and there was this DJ called Alan Clark who could mix, and he was a good DJ. And, this is how open it was back then. He could see my passion, and I think I'd bought something like 10 records, right? Most of the clubs filled with kids, this is the Riverside, Newcastle, filled with kids with ripped denim coming up and saying, "This American stuff's rubbish." He'd be like playing Chuck Brown and be like, "No, stop doing that, play some Smiths. That's not proper music." And then he was nice enough to see that I was passionate. I said, "Oh, Alan, can I have a go at DJing?" And he said, "Yeah, you come on. You can go on and do half an hour at the beginning of the night." I mean, that's that's how it goes when people are open and friendly and warm, and Alan Clark was like that, you know, and DJs back then would be like, oh, this is what this record is, you can get it down there. You know, DJs were few and far between, and we supported each other, and if there was someone new coming along who had passion, you know, you'd spread the word and the knowledge.
Do you think that's anything to do with the sort of size of Newcastle, that it's kind of people understood that the community had to be one and you had to kind of help other people to build it up?
To some extent, yes. But I tell you what Newcastle did suffer from back then was just complete lack of mass. So it would be like, you know, maybe a few hundred people were into hip hop. So if you wanted to do a club night, half of them would be too young to get in. And then it was just difficult. And also remember, we were very immature and naive club promoters. I did my first club night there at a place called Millionaires, and it was called, I forget what I'd called it. Anyway, someone said there's a night that used to be on here called Fever, and it was by these two southern lads who did a rare groove night. People forget that before house music took off, like the cool stuff to be into, if it wasn't the Smiths, would be like rare groove, and that would be the same nights that you would hear go-go and hip-hop, and then perhaps some early house records, yeah? And the people would tend to have a certain dress code, a lot of flip kind of 1950s stuff and connecting to that sort of vibe. And then you get the MA1 jacket time, which is when the Beastie Boys and all that sort of took off. So, you know, I can remember a few people that I knew going around trying to steal Volkswagen and Mercedes metal signs off cars, and me thinking this is not a very cool thing to do. So I didn't get involved. But by the time, you know, I'd realised that it was equipment based. So buying records and playing them in your house and then being invited by a friend in the Riverside to play a few was like standing, you know, on the shore while you saw a ship go by and going, I need a ship and I need to have a wheelhouse and I need to, like, my real journey started when I went to Manchester, and I chose Manchester because I wanted to go somewhere where there was a mass of black society and access to soul and hip hop and the music which had got under my skin, and that was the most important decision. I was never really bothered about what I chose to study as my degree choice chose, because I chose a very hard one. And
what was it?
It was combined studies, which sounds easy until you realise I was doing psychology on one side and then chemistry on the other. And like, that's almost like doing art and physics. Because with psychology, you can answer degree level, questions by just blabbing and going on about a few people doing this and then putting cats in a box and rolling sellotape round, and then the statistics would get hard, but otherwise it was just a lot of stuff. You sit in an organic chemistry lecture and you don't follow what's going on, and they say, okay, so what is this equation? And you just go, I don't want to be here ever again. So I walked out of my chemistry degree because I couldn't handle it emotionally. It was too heavy. And I think in a way I was carrying, to some extent, the weight of what my father wanted me to be. He wanted me to do whatever I wanted, but he had been a chemist, and that was just often the way it went back then. You know, your dad would say, it's really interesting chemistry, you know, son, you should give it a good go. And I was like, all right then. But it got me to Manchester because I just went straight to Johnny Roadhouse once I got my, it's just so immature and terrible to do with money, but, you know, you got like 450 quid from, you know, let's call it beginning of October to December, your first term grant, right? As soon as I got it, I just went straight and bought DJ equipment.
Yeah.
You know, so I had nothing to eat and just practiced scratching Mantronics records with talcum powder on the bottom of them. Do you know what I mean? Because I didn't know what slip mats were. So it's quite hard to...
So did you have the rubber mats then?
So I had the rubber mats on Garrard non-decks that you couldn't change the speed of, but I'd worked out that if you had two Mantronics Who Is It records, that you could spin one back and keep playing the beginning, which really is kind of like, you know, the origins of hip-hop. But like, it was so difficult to know the knowledge back then unless you had someone who knew, and I didn't. So all my friends didn't they sort of liked the fact I was into hip-hop, but I didn't have any hip-hop buddies really. And So when I arrived in Manchester, it was like, okay, let's see what this is all about. And I went to Johnny Roadhouse, got the Garrod decks, the realistic mixer, and I was smashing the little on-off button, which was tiny, used to hurt my nails. And then listening to Stu Allen on a Sunday, and it was literally like being in heaven, because it was just a phenomenal experience to hear that wave of import hip-hop and house and go-go still going on through places like Spinning and Eastern Bloc, and to buy the records and take them back. And okay, so I've already probably lost about 150 quid on this black coffin wooden box Garrod DJ set. I don't stop there. I'm like, how much else money have I got left? Ooh, right, I'm going to go into town and I'm going to buy Ultimate Breaks and Beats because someone had tipped me off about them. So I'd go in, 1 week and I'd buy 2 copies of Ultimate Breaks and Beats #1, and then the next week it'd be #2. Next thing I knew, I had the entire set on doubles, and I had absolutely no grant. So I was having to say, I had to start selling them back slowly. But this is where I'm saying the passion and the obsession is often kind of overlooked in people's stories. But for me, I was going to stop at nothing to learn what these drum breaks were and what DJing was and how to do it and how scratching worked. And
Once a DJ is brought to you with the support of Vinyl Underground Record Store. Since 1993, VU has been shipping new and used underground house, techno, disco, hip-hop, soul and more worldwide from Northampton in the UK. They are your go-to store for upfront releases, repressed classics and deep digging for undiscovered gems. And they're a great crew to deal with who really care about the music and their customers. To show the support to the Once a DJ community, they're giving you 10% off your next order. Just head to vinylunderground.co.uk and use the code ONCEADJ10 at checkout. You also get free UK delivery on all orders over £100. That's ONCEADJ10 at vinylunderground.co.uk. I wanted to create a product for the listeners to be able to support the show and for the guests as a token of gratitude for being on, so I've teamed up with Sure Shot Shop to create some Once a DJ 45 RPM adapter clamps. These are my weapon of choice as a 45 adapter, as they add stability and grip to aid you in any setup. These are available for £25 each plus flat fee postage from onceadj.bigcartel.com, and if you'd like to see the other models you can buy and also customise, check out sureshotshop.com.
it was my passion, and it remained so for a long time,
Yeah. You just mentioned Stu Allen.
Yeah.
Now, my introduction to or awareness of Stu Allen was, I guess, you'd say probably like a hard house tape that my sister had from a Fantasia.
Right.
Where he's playing all this hard house stuff, and then he just drops in, it's a speeded up, I think it's Strong Island.
Oh, by JVC Force.
Yeah. Is it that?
We know Kurt Gazal produced that track.
Yes, we'll come on to him, yeah. No, it wasn't that. It was backed by Dope Demand, King B.
Yeah.
I actually mentioned this in my last episode because I did it with Too Tough from Tough Crew.
Oh, God, I love him. He's one of my heroes. Yeah, he's one of my heroes, that guy.
I was listening to one of your mixes and it was on that, and I was like, oh, yeah. But, so my thing with Stu Allen, like, that was an early taste of hip-hop for me, and I just fell in love with that tune and how funky it is and stuff.
Yeah.
But then the rest of it, I just thought of Stu Allen as a dance music DJ, but then it's only kind of after he passed that I kind of heard a bit more. So like anything else you could share about him would be really cool.
So Stu was like a godlike figure to anybody who was into any type of music that came from import shops, as in the same as Hitsville USA in Newcastle, except Spinning, which he had a deal with, were a much bigger deal. They were like, they were kind of ground zero for all the Hacienda DJs, obviously as well as Eastern Bloc, but Spinning had been there before Eastern Bloc, and Spinning had connections going back to a different era of, soul and funk, and then probably like Northern and Motown and that sort of connection. So it was really, really deep. And Stu had top tens from that shop. So you think about it, you just had to tune in, and he'd play tunes for the first time that you'd ever hear them, and then you knew you could go into spinning that week, and if you really loved something, you could buy it. And if you're lucky, I mean, with the really big ones, there'd be none left.
Yeah.
So, but it meant you could write it down, and you could go in there and talk to people about it, and then, yeah, it's just a lovely thing, because then you get into the culture of record shops, and you get into the culture of people's personalities. And obviously Stu, he did, and I did listen to all of them, he did a soul top 10. Now, obviously, people like Dave Walker from Fat City, he was a big soul head, so that modern soul, was part of my story as well. I was into it, but then it would be the hip-hop top 10 I was mostly into. And then after that, there'd be a house top 10. And I'll be really honest with you, I was into a bit of house and a bit of soul, but it was mostly hip-hop for me at that time. So, yeah, I would go in and I'd pick it up. But obviously, if you went into a record shop then and you wanted to go and buy, for instance, an EPMD 12-inch, you'd see the new groove. There'd be new groove records playing or some really crazy underground house tune, and you'd be like, whoa, I'll have that as well, So there's a cross breeding and understanding that the distributors who are bringing in imports were bringing them in from all different parts of America, and that was the education, You'd learn where certain soul came from, or, what New York hip-hop, obviously then the West Coast, but Philadelphia hip-hop. You're talking about Too Tough, who you've had on there. I was obsessed with Philadelphia DJs before I knew about Jazzy Jeff, really, but like Tap Money, who was Steady B's DJ, they were the first guys who were trying to, who manipulated. It wasn't like someone scratching "This Stuff Is Really Fresh," by Fab Five Freddy.
Yeah.
It was someone transforming like a break by Sly and the Family Stone backwards and forwards and chopping it up, and it was a real puzzle. Like I saw it as a mathematical, scientific puzzle. How is Terminator X what is he doing to rock steady on when I rock, get up, get down, and then he's dragging it back and pushing it. And obviously Terminator X isn't a Philly DJ, but the Philly DJs started the transforming. They started the different way of manipulating a record, and I think I took to that more than scratching, because I just liked the feeling of on the right hand behaving like you're a rhythm guitarist, and then on the left hand pulling it backwards and forwards and distorting it and moving it. It felt as if you were, you were sort of marinating and regurgitating the rhythm, and scratching was much more aggressive and point fronted. But yeah, I was really, really into it. And I used to get the VHS cassettes of the DMC finals, American ones, which I forget what they were called. But there was one year, it was probably like maybe 88 or 89, we used to watch all the time. I mean, some of it's quite hilarious looking back, but people chopping up Al Nafish, the It's Time B-side. Yeah. I had 2 copies of that, and it was just It's Time in the house for 6 hours straight. It's time. Yeah, I loved it, man.
Yeah. So how did you approach kind of trying to get gigs? And so did you feel ready to go out and gig at this point?
Yeah, so this is actually quite an important part of the story, because this is where it melds with social references, it melds with friends, it melds with the time. So obviously when you're young and you've just started college, and you can't do much else other than create your own scene, yeah? And I think a lot of people did that in those days, and that's part of a lot of people's stories. So I arrived in Manchester, spent all of my time scratching and mixing and listening to Stu Allen, and collecting records, and they were slowly getting bigger till they were perhaps nearly 3 feet thick of records. And I mean, that just felt so amazing. And there'd be like Schoolie D and Houdini and Public Enemy, and then there'd be a Bobby Womack album, and all this sort of stuff. And then a few London people I met at parties when I first started, Ed Pitt, he was the first guy I met who was like, I know Ultimate Breaks and Beats and Apache. And I was like, wow, you know that? Yeah, I've got them. Come over. So, talking to him about records, And then I went to Sheffield, and I can remember going into the lead mill in Sheffield and just going up to the DJ and saying, "Can I scratch?" And the person was like, "All right then." So just basically, there's like a full club, and I'm just suddenly scratching a record that I think I'd brought to the club, and I think it was like Ultramagnetic MC's Funky or something, and it was the bit where he goes, "Psych, I carry a Magnum," and I was like scratching that over a house record or something, and then he said, "Can you leave now, please?" I don't know, it wasn't Graham Park, but Graham Park was on at around that time, and he was playing tracks like Super Lover C and Casanova Rudd, which is a great hip hop tune. But that little capture there that Graham Park was playing hip hop tunes early on shows you exactly where we are. We're before the takeover, I'd call it, of club culture by house music.
Yeah.
So I'm in Sheffield, visiting a mate, because I was so busy scratching, I didn't make any friends in Manchester. I'd have to go and see my schoolmates. My schoolmates like, "Oh, I'm in Sheffield." I'm sure all of you who've been students, it's like, you spend the first year visiting your other mates in other cities because you want to keep your friendship going. So I go to Sheffield, and a guy who's sharing a flat with my mate, Martin Wiltshire's sharing a flat, and his friend is Ross Clark, and Ross Clark basically becomes a very important figure because Ross Clark's living with Dave Walker, and Ross Clark and Dave Walker become sort of together. We become a team of like promoting and DJing. We start a club called Fever, which is driven in essence by Ross's ability to have a social network, and my collection of records, scratching and flyering ability, because if you remember how I was saying about being obsessed with collecting ultimate breaks and beats, also when I was given a flyering job, I would do it like it was some kind of maths project. I'd literally just go, "Right, I need the names of all the places where the students live," because I never lived in one of those, what do you call them where students go? Accommodation, yeah?
Halls of residence.
Halls of residence. So I never got into those. I was living in the hood.
What area were you?
It was in Victoria Park, right next to the International, and it was kind of crazy around there. I used to like look out the window at night and go, "What am I doing here?" As people ran around with baseball bats screaming while I listened to Stu Allen in the background. It was like, this is exactly what I need to be seeing while I'm listening to hip hop. So yeah, it was good, but Ross and I decided to start this club, and we named it Fever. And I'll be really honest with you, it was a name that we agreed on, but it was the name of the two guys in Newcastle at Millionaires Club. They'd done a club called Fever with a picture of Mike Tyson when he was like 19. And I said, we should just call it Fever. And he's like, "Oh, that's a good name." Ross brought all of his mates down, including Dave Walker, who was all a big social group. And we just started off from there playing, rare groove mixed with go-go mixed. Ross was more into house, and he had connections to the Hacienda, and he went to see the house music scene there as it started to build up. And Fever was a smash because we knew what we were doing, because we had good taste in music. So the DJing was perhaps at the beginning was a little bit raw, but you learn how to mix on the job. And I was spending so much time scratching and mixing that by the time I got on Technics, which by then, within that year, I ended up buying one of them, and then I'd play cassettes on one side and scratch over the top of them. And then I did cassette mixing with 3 sets of cassette decks. So I'm already making my own rudimentary beats by looping ultimate breaks and beats with 3 cassette decks. Ross isn't so much interested in that, but he's he's building up the social side of it. Dave Walker's helping with that. Everyone's flyering. It becomes a big social scene. You've got Bristolians, Geordies, Essex boys, people from different backgrounds from London. This is the fun of being a student. And at that time, it was an electric time, wasn't it? Because it was it was probably just before the Summer of Love, and then that was about to happen. Funny little things I remember I had this record with Martin Luther King's speeches on it, and at the time there was this house record that went, free at last, "Oh no, we are free at last," you know, the classic speech. And I had the record and I was playing it, and then one of the bouncers or someone on the door who was a member of the club staff said, "Oh, can I borrow that record? You know, do you want to listen to it?" So I lent it to him, and this is a lesson for anyone: never lend any records to anyone. You either don't get them back, or this is what happens to them. So basically, I said to him like a couple of weeks later, "Can I have that back?" And it came back. And exactly where it said "free at last," he'd literally put it on an ordinary record deck and gone backwards and forwards trying to recreate the record until it didn't exist anymore. You know, there was no groove, and a good early lesson there. So yeah, Electric Time, I can remember getting, and then of course you go back and I'd take the DJ equipment back to Newcastle, go to different clubs. There was still Tommy Corker and Scotty doing the same nights in Newcastle. You could slowly see house music coming in. Of course, a lot of big house records went straight into the charts, didn't they? You know, I mean, a lot of the music at that time, it wasn't really underground, you know, Pump Up the Volume and things like that, and Superfly Guy, Gonna Take You Higher. I mean, these were chart records, weren't they, in the late 80s? And then early 90s comes round and the clubs going, we're obviously trying to get our degrees and do that. And the clubs became bigger and bigger and bigger, and people loved it because we put a lot of effort into it. Banners, bigger sound system, jazz and rare groove in one room, early hip-hop, ragga and garage in one room from us with breaks and stuff, and then in another room there'd be like the house, and then the banging sort of stuff that DIY sound system. So if you take you roll forward to like say 1991, and Fever had been at the Man Alive, but by now it's at Legends, and you've got Hugh and Clark and Sefton in the front room doing the jazz and the breaks, and then you've got myself and Ross Clark and Kevin Hyde, rest in peace Kevin, and MCs on the mic, and I think Tom from Groove Armada used to come down, and then also Giant Steps, Morris from Giant Steps used to come down. So, you know, like at that point, there was quite a lot of people coming to this thing. We'd have like half live band DJing on top, and then in the back dungeon room, there'd be DIY sound system from Nottingham, and there'd be 700 people in there, and you'd be DJing, and it would be so many people and so much heat that the moisture would go to the ceiling, and then it would fill the ceiling with water, and as you were DJing, it would drop onto the vinyl, huge bits of sweat from people, and it would like knock the stylus, and it's hard to, lots of people smoking, so you can imagine like hardly any oxygen, smoke, people going nuts to records they'd hearing for the first time. It was insanely different to, you know, how people would experience clubbing now. It was on the edge of dangerous in lots of different ways. You know, there was a great mixing of locals, some scary locals, students, you know, Asian and black kids from London who are coming up and wanted to go to somewhere where they could hear music that they got back home. Do you know what I mean? Mixed with, you know, people like myself who are just obsessed with it. And it felt very special, and it was. And those nights went on and they were great. And then we had an MC who came down one night, and then there was a gun incident. He tried to shoot the bouncer. Then suddenly the rumours went round. We were on the main news at Northwest Tonight. You know,
was this around the time the Hacienda was having old problems?
I think. In all honesty, I think the whole of Manchester was having problems at the time. I mean, it was called Gunchester at around this time that we were doing this stuff. So certainly people were being exposed to stuff that seems quite crazy in looking back. But yeah, of course, you know, clubs equals money, and money equals gangsters, and gangsters, you know. So what we did. So there was another club that was important. For my introduction to street soul was a place called Precinct 13, and I know that it got my friend Ed Pitt, who I started Fat City with, and then Dave Walker, of course. He had a Thursday night called The Daisy Age and we have Fever on a Wednesday night. We used to do some swapping of DJs, which was fun, you know, and it would bring, we got to know some of his crowd and we swapped crowds a bit. But it was at Precinct 13. So basically then 1 or 2 summers into it, we keep the night going while Ed's away. And then like basically the only people you could attract would be playing soul music. It would be the local crowd. And we had a great time being introduced and learning about British soul music, you know, and street soul, which is where that element in my music comes from. But that was the best DJing I think I've ever experienced, was DJing in Precinct 13 on a street soul night. Just because I suppose at that point there was a lot of pirate radio stations in Manchester. And when Fat City opened, we went on to kind of feed that along with other shops in the city. But we did particularly well with street soul, and basically playing street soul that was being played only on pirate radio and only there, nowhere else, into inner city Manchester. Then doing a club where you played these tracks that only they knew was a very almost hermetically sealed, beautiful scene, and the music was slow and deep and soulful and heavy, massive bass lines, and I don't think I'll ever repeat that connection. I mean, I was an outsider, really. I was just taking part, but I was learning about music and arrangement and soulfulness and bass lines and things like that. So that was my education in street soul, and we did that with people like Andy Mad Hatter, and people like Sefton and O&D and Leaky Fresh and all these guys who'd been scratch DJ champions on the Stu Allen show were doing nights there as well. So for a while there, Precinct 13 was one of the few places that you could go to hear street soul. But I want to just rewind quickly because I mustn't forget to mention the kind of dons of all time Manchester sort of sound system cultures like Soul Control. And they were doing house and techno and dance hall and street soul before all of us, including the Hacienda. Do you know what I mean? They were doing it first because they were basically had a massive sound system, and they also, you know, they were in the game of buying imports and buying British reggae and soul tunes and playing them loud at the carnival. So they had a night at the Gallery. I went there a couple of times, and I mean, that was just amazing, you know. Like I was proper Moss Side, and just all of Black Manchester going to a proper dance where you'd hear like, you know, Don't Look Any Further and, you know, classic Black American R&B tunes mixed with loose ends, Just a Little More by Fifth of Heaven, all those type of tunes. You hear them for the first time, listen to them now, they sound like slow jams, but you those tunes were played in the dance and got massive reactions, people standing on tables, banging bottles against the ceiling. Like, it's hard to describe how intense and emotional all that sort of soul music scene was, you know. And I took very little part in that. I only went to the Gallery twice, but I learned a lot, and there were guys that we looked up to, Soul Control. And then, of course, what we were doing was just, you know, essentially like a student night, which attracted locals. But then that was good because it we got our education, and then we were able to, you know, move on. And from that, you know, Fat City was born, the record shop, at just the right time. And, you know, I set that up with Ed, and then Dave came on board.
Once a DJ is brought to you with the support of Vinyl Underground Record Store. Since 1993, VU has been shipping new and used underground house, techno, disco, hip-hop, soul and more worldwide from Northampton in the UK. They're your go-to store for upfront releases, repressed classics and deep digging for undiscovered gems. And they're a great crew to deal with who really care about the music and their customers. To show the support to the Once a DJ community, they're giving you 10% off your next order. Just head to vinylunderground.co.uk and use the code ONCEADJ10 at checkout. You also get free UK delivery on all orders over £100. That's ONCEADJ10 at vinylunderground.co.uk. I wanted to create a product for the listeners to be able to support the show and for the guests as a token of gratitude for being on, so I've teamed up with Sure Shot Shop to create some Once a DJ 45 RPM adapter clamps. these are my weapon of choice as a 45 adapter, as they add stability and grip to aid you in any setup. These are available for £25 each plus flat fee postage from onceadj.bigcartel.com. And if you'd like to see the other models you can buy and also customise, check out showshotshop.com. So what happens then? Are you just like, guys, should we open a record shop?
Well, it was actually...
What's involved?
Yeah, so it was Ed Pitt's idea. I'd gone to, I had a sort of like failed relationship in Leamington Spa, and I was still wanted to DJ, and I came back and slept on my mate's floor, and then basically Ed said, come on, let's start a record shop. And, and I was like, yeah, that would be great because, I love music. So we went to the Prince's Youth Trust and borrowed some money that was backed up by the bank, and then we just got a small little spot. Ed put all of his collected rare groove collection from a London perspective, and I got on the phone to the distributors, and we just started ordering, the CD boxes that were like about 1.5 feet long in cardboard that had one CD in them. That was a marketing ploy at the time. Do you remember those? So there was those we were getting, but that's nothing. We had the odd one of those, but when you're on the phone to the distributor, you'd be wanting to buy all the stuff he knew about, and they'd always be trying to say, oh yeah, there's this new band called, Squiffin' J, and you'd be like, well, what's it like? Oh, it's all right. And they'd put one in there, and it would be something that would be in the stock for 6 years because it would be awful. There was all those sort of stories, but in the end, we were like moving hip-hop of the time. There's a kind of acid jazz was going quite strong, but we were doing more of the American hip-hop with instrumentalization, the kind of cut-up DJ tracks that you could use. Nubian Crackers springs to mind, mixed with obviously the classics of the time, Pete Rock, Main Source, all that kind of stuff.
So we're talking about 93, 94-ish.
Yeah, so Fat City was an idea in late 92, and then it was in function by 93. By the end of 93, we'd probably moved shop twice. Dave Walker was on board, and then within about a year of that, we'd expanded quite big, and then I just had this, as I just described to you, me doing tape loops with cassettes, and then also scratching and listening to American jazz and funk soul records, listening to sample origins. I just thought, I've got to start a record label, because when you're on the phone and someone says, we've got these records coming in, do you want one of these? And then you'd say, I'll have 5 of those, I'll have 10 of that Pete Rock track, and I'll have a reorder on the EPMD stuff, I'll have this, I'll have that. And then you'd get some certain ones in, and they would have samples that were sat in their original, on the original album in the racks of Fat City, and you'd think, I could have done that. I could have looped that and put better drums under it. So there was that nagging thing. So I did an album with, that was like Fat City and Gone Clear. Gone Clear became Grand Central. Obviously, Fat City went on to do all the fantastic stuff with reissues and compilations. But I wanted to kind of make stuff, and that's when I kind of stopped working in the shop and worked in an office that was Fat City's office, and started doing the records, and then basically set up Grand Central, and on we went with that with Rae Christian and Central Heating. And that was quite an adventure with lots of scratching and scratch DJs and, Funky Fresh Few and Mark 1 and Only Child and Mr. Scruff and Tony D and all these things. And it just was a snowball of creativity and releasing records,
Yeah, I mean, you look at some of the artists that you've had on there and some of the guests as well. Like, was your first album that you put out, the Tony D album?
No, so the very first album was called Frying the Fat, and it was basically had the Fat City logo on the front, and that was a compilation album, and I licensed some Tony D tracks, and also I'd met people in the shop who I was up for A&Ring and bringing them together to develop them, and myself and all around me. So we Yeah, we put that out first. I mean, it was me pulling it all together with the help of everyone. I borrowed some money, and once I got into it, so the Fry and the Fat came out after there'd been some 12 inches, right? So the very, very first release is I went to license Tony D, Beats from the Cave. I chose tracks from that album. There was about 18 tracks on that album. I chose like 6 or 7 or 8, put them on my own EP, and released it. Tony D, Central J Parlay EP, and then it was First Priority, which was an early iteration of Rae Christian in a way. Then there was a Rae track, which was me trying to do drum and bass. I mean, this is the great thing about not it's like jungle, but with soul samples. Marcus Intellects remixed that track. This is a key moment. Then I did a Mr. Scruff 12-inch. Remember at the time we're doing club nights that are like driven by Fat City and obviously.
Is this the friends and family nights?
This is before then, because we did nights at the Hacienda, as the Hacienda was in essence coming to an end. We had Grandmaster Flash and LTJ Bookham, and it was just a weird time because we'd all been into reggae and hip hop. When Jungle came out, it was just an extension of that.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Before it became drum and bass, it was very much felt like samplers and drum breaks and very much close to hip hop. So there was that element going on there. And then from that point onwards, I sort of got more serious because I was like trying to think how can I like make something. The way I saw it was that to make something really happen would be to cut your teeth on doing remixes and then make your own album. So by the time Steve and I had been working together on the early Gone Clear, Grand Central, and Fat City, Fry and the Fat stuff, he was engineering and mixing, and I was like, we should basically put an album together. And I think Steve was a bit shocked. He was like, well, what do you mean? I was like, well, I'm just going to get loads of vocalists and like we just make beats and we'll do it. And we did it, so.
My research said that you guys first sort of interacted when you were both sharing a studio space, and he kind of came past and noticed that something that you'd done was out of tune. Is that right?
It was, it was more to do with beats in the bar actually, and it wasn't the doors were. It was a corridor between us. So the Fat City office, which had Steve Smith, who does Ear to the Ground now. So there was Steve Smith, Ross Clark, Ear to the Ground, Fat City, and the beginnings of Grand Central, and then opposite that office space, there was Simply Red's demo studio, which Steve Christian was employed as like an engineer for any sort of projects that Simply Red wanted to invest in, because at the time they were investing in Blood and Fire, the reggae label. And, there's a guy called Chiz Hall who was doing a compilation called From Manchester with Love.net. These are all sort of distant things, but like that was very much happening at the time. And I can remember making beats in that Fat City Ear to the Ground Grand Central office, and literally like having to get on the floor as people with guns came in who were taking over Home nightclub below. That's what Manchester was like at the time, you just water off a duck's back. But we just hid. I turned all my equipment off and like hid in the office and waited for them to go. But that was up and down the same corridor where all this music got made. So I think sort of key moments would be, I'm driving the label. I go back to live in London actually for a while because all of the records are getting made in London, and I was delivering them all around Soho in my Renault Savannah. And full of records, getting parking tickets everywhere I went. Like, do you want 50 of these, 20 of this? Do you want this First Priority 12-inch? Do you want this AIM 12-inch? Do you want this EP from Funky Fresh Few? You have 12 of them, 20 of them, collecting all the money the next week. And then eventually I was like, I don't want to be in London anymore. I'm going to go back to Manchester because it's cheaper, and that's where I know more people, and I've sorted the distribution, and also I'd befriended lots of the journalists at Mixmag and Music, so I knew I'd set a ground swell down that I could, move forward on. Came back, and central heating was essentially what happened from me coming back, because I had more of a hands-on connection, and we brought Tony D out. I flew him out. to do the central heating album, and he showed us the SP1200 and the MPC 60 and how he used them, and we were able to integrate that sound. And really, in a way, that's what Grand Central became, was a kind of extension of American drum machine production. But the thing is, because Steve Christian was a musician and because I like to sample 17 seconds of jazz records, which is where the whole thing Over the Hallway came from. I think I had a 17-bar loop going on, and he came in and he said, "Why is that 17 bars long?" And I was like, "Well, why shouldn't it be 17 bars long?" He said, "Well, because it's normally like 8 and 16. And I was like, "Oh, I don't care. I just loop whatever I loop," you know what I mean? And that was the sort of the beginning of our relationship, where he had musical training and knowledge and production and engineering skill, and I had all of that record collecting and creative sample putting together. So it was a really good combination.
Yeah.
And, you know, Steve was great in the studio and great at programming. So things like the Nightmares on Wax remix. So, you know, so obviously central heating, around the times we started getting the remixes, and I think, you know, the first one we got was the Far Side Running, which is a pretty big one to get.
Yeah.
But the reason why I got that was because when I was living in London, I was living in the flat of Liz Barron-Cohen in her cupboard, and her brother was a film director who was working with Orlando Aguirre, who was the A&R man of Delicious Vinyl Records, who released The Far Side. So, you know, some things in life are about your skill, but other things are about a bit of your skill, then luck, and then also being in the right place at the right time.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So basically I think she must have, this is Liz Barron-Cohen, must have said, "Oh, you know, Mark's been staying, he's been making loads of beats. He's been keeping me up at night pressing the keyboards too hard." And she must have, you know, I think he got a hold of some of my tapes and he said, "Oh, I think I sent him a tape," or he'd been over and he took a tape off me and he took it back, played it to Orlando again, and he heard the tape and he was like, "Yo, do you want to remix The Far Side?" And I remember when he said that, I was almost like thinking, is this a real question? You know, do you want to remix The Far Side? And I was like, yeah. So FedEx DAT arrives. First experience of FedEx, right? This is like, when is this? 2004 or something. First experience, or 2005 maybe. FedEx DAT arrives, and you know, I'm all over it. So I start remixing it immediately, just in the hip hop way. So I'm running the FedEx DAT a cappella is in the DAT machine. I think I might have had to buy a DAT machine to listen to it. And I'm searching for samples for days on end until I find that Gators track, Concentrate, and I know I'm onto it. I add a flute to that loop, and I think that's one of the best parts of it, when I found that flute. And the flute was from a breakbeat compilation, not unlike Ultimate Breaks and Beats, but obviously there was a lot of bootlegging going on at the time, and I got that record from Fat City, chopped the flute up, put it over there, and then I go back to Steve and I'm like, "Come on, man, this is an opportunity." And that must have been just at the time when I moved back, because I remember I did the remix in London in that cupboard, and then we finished it in the studio in Manchester. Steve mixed it, and he also time stretched the "Can't Keep Running Away" because it wasn't in tune. And this is perhaps where you'd see the origin of things not being in key, because I viewed music as something that was like a collage to be manipulated, and I'm sure that's how most hip-hop producers are. I remember later on a story with the RZA from the Wu-Tang Clan, when we were working with Texas, and the bass player in Texas was like, "Mark, I've just been working with the RZA, and I was in the studio with him, and I said, that sample's in the wrong key." And apparently the RZA said, "What's key?"
Yeah.
What's key? I mean, and it's a good question, because sometimes if you can get a related key that's not quite right, it can create the most incredible tension or harmonic difference that a musician wouldn't choose, if you know what I mean.
Well,
so,
this is the danger of the kind of tempo and analysis and stuff you get in DJ software now and stuff, I think, as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
Sometimes things might look incorrect to a computer, but they just sound good.
Of course, yeah. And I mean, that tension is something that's fantastic. So yeah, great adventure and journey in the studio with Steve, lots of late nights. After the Far Side remix, Nightmares on Wax, ask us to do a remix. And then that's when we're really getting into things, 'cause, Steve's picking up on the energy. So I put the Nightmares on Wax remix together in my studio in Manchester. I'm now back in Chorlton. Then I get it to Steve, and then he starts to play keys on it and then does amazing programming. And, we're starting to form the beginning of Rae Christian in those moments, and, that's where the excitement comes from, because then I'm like, well, the next thing we need to do, and it's quite interesting how I did it, because collectively everyone's got different skills, but like central heating, Mr. Scruff's on there, Ames on there, Only Child's on there. There's lots of different vocalists like Buffy Brox, and then Weber on the original version of Spellbound. You've got all these different things on there. Andy Votel, of course, who goes on to do such a brilliant job with Twisted Nerve and his own music and Badly Drawn Boy and Finders Keepers and all that. But this is all when we're all really young and like desperate to just do something, yeah? All in this juicy house little room that's Simply Red own. And, we get to a point and I'm like, well, we need to start making albums. Instead of doing central heating, that's a compilation album. We need to do an album where it's the vision of the artist. So the only person who I thought was capable of that in that moment was Tony D. So I was like, Tony, I want to do an album with you, and I'll get all the vocalists together. But can you bring a rapper? Because I don't, I can't get UK rappers. To be honest with you, at that moment, I wasn't. UK rap was an anathema to me. Really, it was like I liked, the American rap music and rappers rather. The hip hop with people like AG and CL Smooth and all that. So really, if I was going to do a Tony D album, I wasn't going to ask UK rappers. And apologies to all UK rappers, because obviously that's now become its own thing, which is almost dominating in some ways aspects of hip hop culture at times, with Drake copying, drill and all that sort of stuff. But at that moment, my decision was Tony. So he recorded low key. He didn't bring him over, but then he brought YZ, and that sort of led obviously to some other things going on we can get into. But the Tony D Pound for Pound album was my way of saying, you bring your I'll get an SP1200, you bring the beat discs, and we'll make an album. And we did an album in about, 8 days.
Wow.
Yeah, and I had to be very prepared, and it put the pressure there of like, you got to get the vocalist and the songwriting right, get the beats from Tony, give them to people like Buffy Brox, Lorna Harris, who was working with Goldie at the time, and see what you can get done, and we did that, and Low Keys was the rapper on that, and then I think we went to tour that album, and this is then that's probably ground zero for what was about to come, because when YZ comes over with Tony D, that's when the beginning of Northern Sulphuric Soul starts.
Right.
Because basically, while we're touring with Tony D, YZ is around us and with us, and he's hearing beats and he's helping us finish them. I've been DJing in places like Sweden and Norway, and I'm in Sweden with the Jungle Brothers, and I say, get their details. I'm like, I'd love to do a track with you. That happens. Texas had been involved in Good Advice on the Central Heating album because we've been asked to remix Say What You Want. I remixed Say What You Want out of key, and it was the best decision I've ever made, because that disc on the wall behind me, which is not there for your viewing, but that disc on the wall behind me, which is just there to remind me that I can still do it, but that disc on the wall comes from me mixing in the wrong key. So I made a remix of Say What You Want that sounded like the world was going to end because of the tension between her vocal and the sample I had. And that sample was what turned out to be Good Advice, but it wasn't in the same key as Say What You Want. So basically I sent them a cassette and they were like, Mark, we really love the music, but it's in the wrong key. So it's like, well, hang on a minute, I'll remix it again. So I did it again with Steve's help with different samples, and we did that Say What You Want remix, which is one of our best bits of work, actually, as remixers. Very aggressive with a Mob Deep scratch. Take these words home and think it through. And then before you know it, I'm able to put Northern Sulphuric Soul together because of the Texas connection. Cue Ball and Kurt Cazal, I'd worked with Mama Mystique by being asked to remix her. He'd produced Mama Mystique, Kurt Cazal, so I was like, hey, I want to work with Mama Mystique. I don't know if you've ever heard her, but she was brilliant. But he said, oh man, she's quite difficult to get a hold of. We'll do it for you. And that was how Q&C ended up on Northern Sulphuric Soul.
Right. With Texas, was it the label or was it the band that were kind of pushing the hip-hop remixes?
I think it was Ashley Heath, who was the boyfriend and editor of The Face. He was the boyfriend of Charlene Spiteri, and he had his ear to the ground, and he knew us from Manchester because he'd been to our Fever Club night. So you can see it's all about threads in the ether of that time.
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean? So it's like, you can't make that stuff up. It just happens. And if the energy's there and people are going in directions, they'll ask each other. So he asked me to meet Charlene, and basically I got given that remix, and I did it wrong, but they liked the music so much they did a song on it, and it ended up on White on Blonde. So you can see, and if there's anyone listening, the lesson in that is that your mistakes will often be the best things you ever do in your life. So I did something wrong, but the passion was there, and there was a good idea there. And I can remember Steve saying to me, don't ever do that again. You know, if you get a remix, I'll get it in key. And I said, but if it had been in key, we wouldn't have got that track with them. So do you know what I mean? It was like a moment where non-musicality won. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Hip-hop won, you know?
Yeah, because it's interesting that you had this kind of strong link and connection with US hip-hop at that time, because I don't know that there was much of that sort of thing happening in London. I mean, you had like the Creators that they connected quite a lot with US rappers, but I think that was probably a little bit after.
Just a tiny bit. They did great stuff though, didn't they? I think, yeah. Do you know what? There was all sorts going on, and you should never think that you were in isolation, because I'd been in London for that year when I was driving the records around. So of course there was the problem with London at that time is that you had Giles Peterson, you had the jazz scene, you had the Monday nights at that club. I went to them occasionally. You had Mo Wax, you had Ninja Tune, but it certainly was a bit more earthily connected to what I call traditional origins. And it's quite interesting, if you think about it, that Tony D was in Trenton, and that was an outlier of New York, and he always used to go on like, I could have done a lot better if I'd moved to New York.
Yeah.
And then you look at us, and I always remember A&R men saying, you know, people in London, when we're in London, we think, oh, who did that? Oh, that's Rae Christian, or that's on Grand Central, or that's really good. What's going on up there? And then they'd come up to visit us, and they go, what are you guys doing up here? And it was kind of a little bit of a mythological scene, because it wasn't, we didn't do drugs. We didn't go and hang out with James Lavelle. We didn't go and like be on the scene. We just basically continued to work in our bedrooms on making beats. And then I borrowed money and worked very hard to make sure that the release is right, and put a team together, of A&R and business people like Ian Cook and Eliza Terrell and Rachel Wood and Aowen Sanderson and Darren Laws and Howie Martinez. These are all names that should be heard. These are people who worked really hard on my ideas that we collectively built up together, And obviously Dave Walker kept running the shop really well with Matt Triggs and Mark Torkington and lots of these people. And it was a real scene of really extreme energy where people were trying to survive, to pay rent and eat. But then also we all arrived in the Northern Quarter every day and got on with making businesses and life and breathing and club nights and giggles and laughs and, oh, have you heard that new tune? And, oh, this has done that. And then, of course, you'd have Luke Una, hanging around there being hilarious. And, he said, they did T-shirts with Northern Sulphuric Soul on, and that's where I got the idea from. And I said, can I use your terminology for this album? And he was fine with that, because at the time, I did the second electric chair, and then Only Child is Justin Unabomber, and I was releasing his records and playing gigs for them and them playing gigs for us. So it's hard.
Right.
It's hard as we all get older, you forget how that was a scene and a lifestyle, and people who are really connected and young and laughing and joyous and full of love, It was a great time, and that's what DJing gave me, because it was the beginning of all that, and it continued throughout it.
It's the people doing it for the love of the music, isn't it? Not for status or wealth necessarily or anything like that. It's just the people that love creating, that get together and they want to share music, share ideas.
Yeah, and I mean that's what something like having a record shop is all about, transferring energy and excitement of a record to the person who walks in, and they go, I'll buy that. And the pile gets bigger the more you know your knowledge of those tunes. And then as a DJ, it's about telling a story. And there was so many club nights that were fantastic. Friends and family, Christian Wood, or Woody as he was known, Tom Hall in London. These great nights that clashed people like Roots Maneuver and the Next Men, and fantastic artists from America in both hip-hop and soul and DJing, Cool DJ Marv. I mean, there's literally hundreds of names, and it was all part of a scene. And that's very hard to achieve. It requires everybody to believe in it, and it requires fabric and something in the air and a belief and a time. But then, like all scenes and everything in life, it has a time limit, because those people get older and then things change. The internet comes in, or things just can't work anymore. And that's why there's a sort of misty haze of memory, and then to some extent melancholy about it a bit. But it's youth, it's life. And, we're very lucky that we lived through that period before the digital era took over music and clubs and people and phones. It was all, cigarettes and big beats and bass and having a great time.
Yeah. How did you guys kind of get in touch with AIM? Because I think like both the first two sort of AIM albums, they're things that I had on heavy rotation at the time.
Yeah, no, he's a very talented guy. He came into the shop Fat City and he was buying break albums, and I said, what do you need them for? And he said, I'm making music. And I said, I've got a label, or I'm starting a label. Let me hear your demos. Started there, got the demos, and we slowly went on the journey that led up to his albums. And of course, obviously, with Northern Sulphuric Soul, if you look at who raps on Cold Water Music, you'll see that it's QNC and YZ, and then my cousin Kate Rogers. So basically, I A&R'd that for him to get him the vocalists, and he was, the master of the beat side, and we had to find a way of transferring his very meticulously made Octamed and Atari beats. They had to be completely remade again into an Akai sampler, and then engineered and mixed by Steve, which was actually, a big, if you're very organised, you can get it done. But a guy called Mike Ball, who was like head engineer at the label, he went into a little back room on Tibb Street there, and he transferred all the samples for Cold Water Music from Andy Turner's records to an Akai sampler, and then basically Steve mixed it, and I just made sure that he got the rappers, which is quite easy because QNC were involved with Rae Christian, and so was YZ, so we got that sorted. Andy Turner liked my cousin's singing, so I sorted that out. I had a record in the studio that Sale was made from. So yeah, I used to share samples, share all of the equipment and the people and the vibe, and that's how it all got made. But Andy was up there in Barrow chopping his samples up and making magic with them. He was probably the most talented of us all at putting samples together, for sure.
He's a wicked producer, for definite. Why did you have to rebuild his beats? Is it because it's hard, like he didn't have the right hardware?
So when AIM had made his Cold Water Music or his tracks, right? He'd done it on an Atari and Octamed. This is I think it was my memory. I think that's what was going on. Whatever it was not, it was like 8-bit, but like off the front of a magazine cassette type production. See what I mean? So in other words, like for it to be as the highest quality that was available at the time, because I know it's obviously the digital world has taken us to like 32-bit float now, and music sounds massive in comparison to even our tunes in the 90s.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's massive now in comparison. So I was like, Andy, you know, we're going to have to get all of your records, and the way you've made this, you're going to have to make it again in this studio. And while me and Steve are doing the remixes and doing our stuff, there was a back room, and Mike Ball basically went, and Andy would go, right, this is off that, and it would go in, and then basically you'd have to, essentially almost had to make the whole project twice. Andy made it himself entirely, but I'm trying to say the process was how are we going to get all these samples of yours into an Akai and get them at the highest quality. And then, you know, basically Steve just mixed it. I know that took a long time, which is why we started like, you know, it probably took a few months of that process, but this is what, you know, if you want to do things properly, you've got to treat the whole process seriously, you know?
Yeah.
You know, if you're going to make an album where someone's got loads of demos and they're made in a certain way, it's got to be finished professionally. And to do that, I facilitated it by making sure that the studio time was there, and Mike Ball would sit there and go, right, what do I do next? You need to take this horn off this jazz record and put it exactly there.
Yeah.
Good on Mike Ball for you know, sitting down and doing that.
So you toured with a live band, didn't you, with Rae Christian? Is that right?
Yeah. I mean,
was that from the first album, or was that from Sleepwalking?
Oh God, no! It started with Tony D. Like I said, that Tony D. That Tony D. tour was hip hop, but then I went in 1998 Christmas time to Australia, and I'd seen Dan Peter Parker. I judged one of the DMCs, and basically I got into a situation where I loved him. From the minute I saw him, I said, "I'll put you first," and I thought he was great. I was always looking for DJs that were better than me at scratching, because, you know, I loved scratching, but I wasn't particularly good at it. And these guys were on another level. And then Sneaky, I'd really love to remember Sneaky's origin story. I know that in the end, I think we might have got Sneaky in to do Rae Christian as a bassist. I'm sure we did, for the Northern Sulphuric Soul stuff. But somehow I just ended up taking Sneaky and Parker to Australia, and that's kind of one of the key moments as to how they started doing the mad stuff. You know, that became Finger Thing, which I absolutely loved, and we all loved that stuff. Yeah, it was a great time, but like, it was very fluid, you know. So we picked up a drummer called Tom on that tour. So basically, slowly it all got put together. Because remember, you can start out with just scratching records or playing DATs. You know, I'm sure several times we had mini discs and DATs, and Bev just singing over them. Bev was singing Spellbound over a dub plate of the original version around the central heating time, because you could do PAs in clubs. You know, you could say, "Oh, we'll go to Leeds and we'll sing Spellbound off a dub plate." And so that's the origin of it. And then, oh no, we'll put in, you know, and then we had people like Chip Wickham come in, you know, and play saxophone and flute, because once we'd done Spellbound, we needed a flautist, and then play saxophone as well. And then the next thing you know, we've got like a freestyle band with a drummer, Sneaky on bass, Parker on cuts, Steve Christian on guitar, and then, you know, double bass for Sneaky, and then horns. And then the next thing you know, we've got all that with Supernatural, the freestyle rhymer thrown in, then the Far Side touring with us. And, you know, we could never get Bobby Womack over. I remember thinking, should we get Bobby Womack over to launch this Sleepwalking album? And Womack was still touring at the time, and I think it was like $30,000 a gig. So people's perception of things is always different. You know, like Bobby Womack, like, you know, he's not doing anything nowadays. He's not releasing records, but in Black America, Bobby Womack is king, or was king. You know, so he was doing gigs for $30,000. So I thought, well, I can't afford that. You know, to come and do one song. You know.
Did he come over to record, or did he record?
No, that was all done remotely via DAT because it was too expensive and hard. And I just got the contact, spoke to him on the phone, sent him a DAT, and then we spoke on the phone a lot, actually. Him talking to me for hours, me just going, I think he might have needed someone to talk to be honest with you. But he was an absolute dude. I mean, some of the stories were just incredible. So everything gets made in different ways. But, you know, as of an overarching kind of sense of some of the elements of, you know, people think, well, how did you do all that? Or how did this happen? And, you know, how do record shops run? How are record labels run? Well, basically, in the end, when you start a business, you've only got one choice. You've got to keep moving forward, otherwise the business ends. Right? So that's a hell of a axe to be hanging over your neck. So once I started employing lots of people, I had to keep paying their wages. So you've got to have ideas and you've got to keep moving forward. And in those pressured moments, you can make mistakes or you can go out of fashion, or in the end, it's just life, you know. But like when you join the battlefield to push on and make stuff, you go until it stops. And we had a hell of a run, and it was a long time. And when you, from this story I've told today, when you think it goes back to the beginning of the 80s or the mid 80s, and then, you know, the clubs in the late 80s, and it's a long period of time, isn't it?
Yeah. So just going back then to the Bobby Womack bit, how kind of exciting was it to be able to connect and work with him, sort of phone calls aside? It must have been pretty cool to be like, we're working with Bobby Womack here. Yeah,
I mean, I was really, really excited about it all because he had, you know, I'd bought his records in the 80s, and he was actually quite big in the 80s on the soul scene, you know, the Poet album. And then When the Weekend Comes, I don't know if you know those tracks, and All the Things We Do When We're Lonely, like he was still making really great tunes. So to me, it was like working with a hero for sure. And I was very excited. I couldn't quite believe it was going to happen, or that I'd even spoken to him, because I went on an interview on Dublab, an internet radio station can you believe, must have been 1999 or 2000, which is a long time ago for an internet radio station. And, you know, someone heard me talking. He said, and I think the person had said, is there anybody else in LA you'd like to work with? And I said, well, I really like the Far Side, who I've remixed, and also I really loved Bobby Womack when I was growing up. And then a Post-it note was put on the desk as I was talking, saying Bobby Womack Management, this guy's number. So I got off that interview and went back into central Los Angeles, down in the center of town there, and basically got the Post-it note. And I was at this company called Green. I can't remember the name. They were doing the promotion for Northern Sulphuric Soul. So basically they, you know, they let me use the phone, and I rang up this guy and he said, hey, yeah, I don't manage Bobby anymore, but Bobby's really, you know, he's really, he's all about the music, you know. He's still really into the creativity and everything. So here's his home number. So I wrote it down, and I rang it, and it was like, hello. I'm like, hi, is that Bobby Womack? Yeah, it is. And it's like, off I went, and I was like, Bobby, I live in Manchester in England, and we make music, you know, we're doing stuff. It's like got a bit of a hip-hop angle and a soul angle. I've always been a big fan of yours. And can I just say, did Rod Stewart, like, ever pay you your, you know, publishing royalties on Do You Think I'm Sexy? Because it rips off one of your songs, doesn't it? And he's like, yeah, how do you know that? And like, that was it. We were pals. Because I knew about him, and he knew that I was a fan. And I just said, well, look, give me your address and I'll send you a DAT, and then whatever you can come up with, let's see how we get on. And then, so of course, I'm foaming at the mouth by the time I get back to it. It's like, Bobby Womack's going to work with, so all we've got to do is get a DAT. And looking back, I love what we did, and I loved working with him. I just wish I'd sent him more up-tempo stuff that he'd got into. But at the time, we were so stuck in that 90 to 95 BPM that I just feel like, as the artist I am now, would have loved to have done something, at 110 or something where it was moving tempo-wise,
Yeah, because I've not listened to Northern Sulphuric Soul for quite a while, but I always think of that had kind of a bit more of an up-tempo side to it, didn't it?
Yeah, but it's, I'll be honest with you, Sleepwalking was really difficult to make because I was under a lot of business pressure, and I was DJing around the world promoting Northern Sulphuric Soul, and we'd released Cold Water Music, and I was producing, and I was like executive producing Only Child, and Steve was doing that, and we were doing remixes, and we had a remix agency and a DJ agency, and I was employing people. You see, when I describe it all, I think, how on earth did I do it, and how did everyone else keep with the ideas? But in the end, a lot of people's collective effort made it run for 11 years. And, in the end, I often feel jealous of the fact that at that time, in that moment, if I had not been a label, a DJ, a manager, a publishing, all those things, and just been an artist, I would have developed myself as an artist. And I've only been able to do that in the last sort of 20 years. Since it all ended. You see what I mean? So basically, things like that question is that I think I knew that we needed more up-tempo stuff, or I knew that we needed more of this and more of that. But then in the end, it was like, you need to get this finished within 2 months, because if you don't release it, the label's going to go under. Imagine being under that pressure. Do you know what I mean? And then getting other people to finish so that we can get stuff out to sell it, because the label's going to go under. And then, having to make people redundant because you didn't sell enough records. That's all very, very stressful stuff.
Yeah. Well, look, we've done about just under an hour and a half now. So I think if we kind of wrap it up for today, and if we reconvene in a week or so, and we can kind of look at the last 20 years, really, because we've gone so much into the 20 prior to that.
And in a way, it should be. There's things that I've got to say that I do and I'm doing that I think are almost worldwide unique.
Yeah,
and I think that for your show, if you're somebody who can unlock those things, then you'll have a hell of a show on your hands that is actually into new territory.
Yeah. I think we've got a lot to get into. So, that's great stuff, Mark. Thanks ever so much for your time today.
It's a pleasure, mate. I've got to go and get my son now, but you have a good evening.
You too. Speak to you soon.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Once a DJ. If you'd like to support the show, then head to onceadj.com/support to find out how you can help. If you'd like to get in touch with any feedback or suggestions, email onceadjpodcast@gmail.com. Once a DJ is produced by the good people at Remote Control. If you'd like to find out more about working with them, head to remote-ctrl.co.uk.
That was nice.